Hello, everybody. Today we are covering episode 3 in Tea and 21 with Laura Sharpe. And today I have with me Eleanor Baggerley, my friend, who is going to introduce herself now.
Hi, Laura. I have my youngest little girl, Ava, who is 6 and she has Down syndrome. I am also a trustee for Down syndrome Northeast, which I have been for 3 years, I think now. And I don't know whether you want me to talk about this or not, but obviously I wrote Ava the Mermaid, named after Ava, all about kind of her having Down syndrome and helping other people with the diagnosis.
Brilliant. And we met quite early on in my pregnancy because I had a prenatal diagnosis with Lucy that she was going to have Down syndrome. And during the process, we had lots of scans. We had 3D scans. We had scans at the hospital. So we saw Lucy lots of times. And by the time we had her diagnosis, they did tell us it was going to be a little girl. So we gave her the name Lucy. And that was when we really started to bond with her, which we were lucky that we were able to do that during the pregnancy. And I remember making the announcement. I don't know how your announcement went, Eleanor, because your diagnosis was postnatal. But with our diagnosis during pregnancy, we decided we wanted to tell everybody that Lucy was going to have Down syndrome. And I did a lot of research around that. What's the best way to put that message out there to people? Because you're kind of frightened what the reaction of your friends and family is going to be. A lot of close friends and family already knew, and I'm pretty sure we already knew each other before I'd even put on Facebook that Lucy was going to have Down syndrome. So I knew there were already people around me that were going to be positive about it, but we were quite frightened, I remember. And there was a lady called Sarah Pree, who has a little girl, Marnie, who she had shared her Facebook announcement with me. And I took inspiration from that. It was really helpful because I literally didn't know where to start. So bless her, she was so lovely. And she messaged me and she showed me a screenshot of what she'd put out there. And I sort of, reworded and did something similar. And mainly just said, our daughter's going to have an extra chromosome, but we're still going to love her just as much. Who cares about the extra chromosome? And I couldn't believe the reaction. I couldn't believe how supportive everybody was. And I was so frightened when I pressed go, but actually immediately got messages privately and publicly saying, you're going to be the best parents. We're so pleased for you. We're so happy for you. Because at that point, a lot of people didn't even know we were pregnant. Never mind that we're going to have a baby that had Down syndrome. It was literally just, our pregnancy announcement along with Lucy's diagnosis. And at that point, we had another scan, and we'd already had a scan when we'd said to the fetal medical consultant that we wanted to carry on. He did a scan then and he didn't see any heart defect. He thought that the heart looked perfect, but it was the size of a raisin, I think, at 17 weeks or something.
Because I think the size of anyone's heart is about the size of their fist.
Yes.
So a baby that's
only a few weeks. It was only tiny. Yeah. And bless him, he thought that her heart looked perfect. And then a couple of weeks later, I think I was about 18 or 19 weeks pregnant when he did the second scan. And that's when he found that what he'd seen was almost like seeing the heart in reverse. He'd kind of seen what he thought was the right heart, but actually it turns out it wasn't, because she had the complete AVSD, which is the 2 holes, top and bottom, and then only 1 valve across the middle. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
We still have to keep each other right, really, don't we? What all the terminology is.
It's hard to picture it. But I remember the consultants drawing a picture for us, and part of that was so that we could show our older kids what it was as well. And it's quite confusing with having the two holes in both the top, a hole in each of the top and the bottom.
Yes, exactly. And only the 1 valve instead of 2. So the valve's doing more work than it should or something, I think.
Yeah, there can be different issues with the valve. Yeah, so much to it.
Yeah. And I remember when we got that call, this was, I think that scan might have been before we'd put the announcement on Facebook. I'm not sure now. Because although I think we were already in touch, weren't we? And then I think when we got the diagnosis of the heart, a friend of a friend who'd already introduced us said, "Did you know that Eleanor's little girl has that same heart defect?" And I couldn't remember you telling me.
I don't know whether I don't think we'd got into kind of the details of it?
No, I don't think we had. And I got in touch with you and I was in a bit of a panic, I think. And you said, look, let's just meet for lunch. You need to meet Ava. And I think it was it the start of the summer holidays? It might have been the very beginning of the summer holidays.
I had all three of the children.
Yeah, you had all three of them and it was a weekday. So it must have been the holidays. And we met up for lunch, didn't we? And you really put my mind at rest about, everything. Obviously, you'd been to hell and back with Ava's surgery and everything, but at the same time, meeting you all and seeing Ava so healthy and happy and interacting with everybody and causing mischief as she does. It was a lovely. I really enjoyed that lunch because it really made me feel like things are going to be okay. So Ava was your third child. So you had experience of having children before. Obviously, I was a first-time mum. So our experiences, I think, even being pregnant were probably very different. Tell me a bit about your journey with, getting pregnant with Ava and then what happened from there, really.
Don't know whether you want the story of the getting pregnant with Ava. So I guess hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? So we had a postnatal diagnosis with Ava. So in terms of the pregnancy, I would say everything was the same as it was with the other two up to a point. As I say, in hindsight, she didn't move as much, which possibly could have been an indicator to me that she had Down syndrome, but it wasn't even in my realm of thinking through the pregnancy.
And I remember people saying that to me when I was pregnant, you might not feel as much movement, but I was just permanently kicked. So it's different for everybody, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And she did, as I say, looking back, she did move a lot less than the other two. And there were some other things as well. So I had a low-lying placenta, so I'd had to go in for extra scans towards the end of the pregnancy just to make sure that the placenta had moved so that to work out whether I could kind of go through with the natural birth or whatever. And at that point, they'd measured her femur length as being short, so they thought she was going to be quite small. So they were wanting to induce me early based on her size. And still at this point, we had no idea. Again, hindsight.
Because obviously that's a soft marker, isn't it? And I know people have gone on to have diagnoses based on that.
Yeah. So
but I guess if you were quite far along, they just didn't think they needed to do more investigation, I guess.
So, well, from the normal blood test that I actually didn't realise was you didn't have to have it. I just had it with all three of them to kind of assess the chances of having a child with Down syndrome. And that came back. It was slightly higher than it had been with my other two, but it was still classed as being fairly low chance, really. So there was just nothing to suggest that she might have Down syndrome in my mind. I did get induced early. I think it was probably about a week and a half early. Part of that was because I had horrific SPD and I was just sick of my life and just was like, it's fine, just take me, do what you need to do. So we did go in early. And because we were going in to be induced, we had kind of told friends and family that I was going in that day to have Ava. So I felt like a lot of people were waiting on the birth announcement, knowing that she was being born that day. I'd had quite quick births with both of the other two. So I had anticipated that Ava would be quite a quick birth as well. So she literally came flying out. The midwife didn't have enough time to get her gloves on before she kind of shot into the birthing pool. So it was very quick. She did need to kind of have a little bit of oxygen, partly because it was so quick, but also because there was the Down syndrome to kind of consider there as well. Apparently, the midwives aren't allowed to tell you that they suspect that the baby has Down syndrome. So our midwife was asking a lot of questions around it, like, does she look like your other children? And how's she feeding compared to your other children? And
so again, with hindsight, if you'd have known why you might have been a bit more suspicious about those questions.
And I guess I was. So I knew as soon as I looked at her. And
you had a feeling anyway.
Yeah, I said to Andrew, so I'd waited until all the midwives and all the kind of medical staff had gone out of the room. And I'd said to Andrew, do you think she has Down syndrome? And his response was, no, of course not. All babies look like Winston Churchill. They're all a bit screwed up. So, and I was like, oh, okay. And there was just that niggle in the back of my mind. And It was evening time by this point. He'd decided to go home to kind of look after the other kids, and I was left then in the hospital. And I just kept looking at her, and I was Googling on the on and off hospital Wi-Fi to kind of look for features of Down syndrome. And I was like looking at her ears, looking at her hands to see whether she had the palmar crease. And I was like, no, her hands have got.
She had the two
she's got
creases, not the
two,
one.
Yeah. Looked at her toes. I had the kind of the stockings on to stop you clotting. So I was like peeled it back to look at my toes. I was like, well, I've got a bit of a bigger gap between my toes, so it might just be that she's got similar feet to me.
Yeah, because the sandal toe thing is a funny one, isn't it? Because it seems with some children like Lucy, it seems to start to develop a bit later on. Like even at birth, Lucy didn't have a gap at all.
So Ava does have a slight gap, but I do.
And exactly.
So it was really hard. And then I was pulling up photographs of my other children from when they were little to kind of try and compare facial features.
Bless you. I mean, it sounds like your mind was going like 20 million miles an hour, which isn't ideal when you've just had a baby, because it already is probably doing that.
And I think so she was latching on to feed, but she wasn't feeding. But I think it was the fact I'd had experience with the older two that I knew to kind of hand express and feed her so that she was getting something.
Yeah. Which I didn't get that support.
Yeah. And if I hadn't had my other two children, I probably wouldn't have even known to do that. So I did feel kind of quite alone. And again, I'd kind of said to the midwife through the night, is there anything wrong with my baby? And she was like, well, what do you think is wrong? Not that there is anything wrong, I would like to say. But obviously at that point, that
terminology you're bound to use it.
I didn't know what was going on. Yeah. So we did get the diagnosis the following morning. Wasn't done in the best way, but that's a whole other story.
So had they taken bloods during the day? And
no, it was in the morning. They said that
they came and said they thought that Ava might have Down syndrome.
Has anyone told you that your baby might have, or it was something basically, has anyone said that your baby might have some kind of syndrome? And I was like, and I was on my own at this point. Andrew hadn't yet made it back into the hospital. So they then took bloods. And then obviously my mind went to all that, oh my God, what could it possibly kind of be? I will use wrong in inverted commas for now, but yeah. So
you started panicking because they didn't even really talk about what it might be, because there are syndromes that are compatible with life, supposedly, although they're now starting to backtrack a little bit on that, aren't they?
So actually going back to the night before when we did give birth to her, I made sure I took a picture from a very specific angle so that it wasn't clear that, because obviously I thought she had Down syndrome, but we weren't sure. And I just did a very quick kind of baby's been born. And I don't think I even put it on social media. I think
just sent it privately.
Yeah. But because people had known I'd been going in to be induced, people were starting to ask kind of later that day. So it did take a bit of, how am I going to word this? And we didn't know anyone with Down syndrome at that point. I had no one to kind of go and speak to ask. I didn't know.
That was the same as me at that point in my pregnancy.
Yes, exactly, but I guess you didn't need to, there wasn't the expectation to announce something at that.
No, exactly, no, because nobody other than close friends and family knew we were pregnant. So therefore, it was all very private until we chose to make it public, whereas you felt you needed to make something
So we
public
did
quickly.
kind of, we worded it very much around it doesn't really matter. She is loved by all of us. I didn't know, stupidly, I didn't know how like my immediate family were going to react to it, which clearly I didn't need to be worried about that, because Ava is totally loved and adored.
But the reality is if you didn't know anybody, around your family and friend circles that had Down syndrome or had children with Down syndrome, then you don't know
how anyone.
You don't sit across the dinner table and say, "How do you feel about people with Down syndrome?" It's not something you would discuss unless it came up.
And even if people did have a point of view, I think once it's a family member or a close friend, I think that changes very quickly.
Yeah, it does,
anyway, I could have quite easily been one of the 90% of people who terminate pregnancy.
Well, I thought I was going to be at the point where we were having the.
I would like to think that if knowing kind of what I know and I would do the homework around it, I wouldn't have been. But I guess kind of everything that's put out is that it's a really hard thing to live with, and it's totally not, or it doesn't have to be.
No.
And I know there's different. I know people have kind of very different experiences, and that's not to kind of do any of those down. But
No.
yeah, I think knowing what I know now, in a way, I'm glad that I had the postnatal diagnosis because I didn't have to have any of that concern. But equally, the heart condition got missed. But on the other side of it, I didn't have that time to kind of get used to it and get it in my head before she was born. Although it took less than 24 hours to kind of turn that around in. And I was very adamant that she wasn't going to be defined by her diagnosis and that she was going to live her life however the hell she wanted to live her life, and the diagnosis wasn't going to get in the way with that. Yeah, she was 3 days old by the time we got the heart diagnosis.
At least they know that now. At least they know if a child is born with Down syndrome, they need to look at the heart quickly.
Well, they did.
Whereas in the past, I think that, it wasn't.
It was looked at straight away, and they'd said that it was clear, and they'd checked it a couple of times.
Oh, they said it was clear?
Yeah. They'd said everything was showing as being fine, and it was.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So we were told, and so that was when I was messaging people, it was, she has Down syndrome, but we're okay because she doesn't have a heart condition, and that was what we were messaging people because we were told
have any of the kind of
clear.
typical serious medical.
They hadn't picked up on the murmur or anything.
Yeah.
So it was on day 3. We were packing our bags ready to leave. The kids had come in, the older 2 had come into the hospital to kind of come and pick her up and take her home with us. And I don't know what her role was, actually. I don't know whether she was a midwife or a nurse. I'm not entirely sure what her role. I think she must have been a midwife, maybe. But she said, I just want to have like one final check. And that's when she was like, I need to get one of the consultants to come and listen to it. And
so do you think she felt like she was maybe presenting a little bit like there might be a problem, or?
I don't know, because
a lot of medical professional I've come across that if they're told something is okay, then it's okay. They don't tend to sort of dig or question it, do they?
Everything happened so fast at that point that I didn't actually get a chance to ask why she felt she needed to do that final check. And then it was a Saturday morning because the consultant had said, he was just like, yeah, there's a murmur there. And ideally they would have kept us in until the Monday.
That's what happened to us. They wanted to send us home on the Saturday, but they needed to do a scan on the Saturday, which was much more difficult to do.
Yes, they were like,
normal weekday.
There's no one kind of at the Freeman in the normal clinics, so they had to phone across. And I was like, we're going home today. I was like, we are going home today. I was like, I'll do whatever we need to do, but we are going home today.
Yeah.
Because with my older 2, I was home in less than 24 hours after having them. Yeah. So I was just like, I don't do this staying in hospital malarkey. Little did I know I'd have to get used to that. But
But I was the opposite. You see, I'd prepared myself for staying in hospital for a long time. So to have her on the Wednesday and be sent home on the Saturday, that was crazy. It was so quick.
Yeah. So we had to fly across town to the Freeman. So that was the condition that we were allowed home. They were like, you've got your own transport, haven't you? I was like, yes. I was like, whatever we need to do. So they were like, right, we'll phone the Freeman. We'll tell them to expect you. You're going to have to go to the ward.
I remember you saying
on
that.
The ward.
You had to dash over to the ward.
So we had to fly over there. My mum and dad had come up, obviously, to see Ava. So I'd had to phone them and ask them to meet us there to pick the other 2 up because we didn't know how long we were going to be.
Yeah.
So she was scanned on the ward and they obviously confirmed that she had the complete AVSD. I think at that point we didn't even know that her valve was leaking. I think it was literally just about the AVSD at that point.
That must have been a shock.
Yeah, that was far more of a shock than having the diagnosis of Down syndrome, in all honesty.
Yeah, I remember. I've obviously getting the diagnosis during pregnancy was tough and it was emotional and it was a bit of an up and down roller coaster. But then I'd had a couple of weeks to kind of get used to things and I'd started reaching out and speaking to people like yourself. And I was starting to kind of feel, calmer. And then we had that scan where he said, I'm really sorry, I missed the heart defect. And it was such a shock. And I remember a massive sort of almost like a grief came over me. And I was really inconsolable for a good sort of 24 hours, just because all you seem to see when it comes to heart surgeries and stuff is quite scary, bad things in the media.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I seen a little bit more of what to expect after the surgery, I guess, when I got to that point. And even the leading up to it, I think part of it was because they'd insisted on putting an NG tube into Ava when she was born because she wasn't feeding for that length of time. But I was very, as you know me, Laura, I do things my way.
Well, I was the same. They did the same with Lucy, and I was the same about that, yeah.
Yeah, so I was adamant that I was going to breastfeed her, and they'd said kind of, well, if she doesn't gain the weight, you won't be going home. And I was like, she will have gained the weight, believe me. And she did, so they were happy to take the NG tube out. So I think when we then had that kind of the AVSD diagnosis at day 3, it was then, I mean, the 4 months from that point to the heart surgery was such a whirlwind that kind of, there was just a lot going on in a very short space of time, I guess. But that experience of the NG tube when she was first born made me think that if she had to have an NG tube to help her feed in leading up to the surgery meant that we had to be in hospital for it. And no one at any point had explained to us that actually it was perfectly fine and normal to have an NG tube and be home.
Yeah.
So I found
how families kind of navigate that. You don't see people talking about it, and you don't. And a lot of people don't go out feeding their babies with NG tubes, whereas I see that now, but I spot it. Yes. Whereas I think you're just not looking out.
And that's what I was going to say. Yeah, I was thinking I don't think I'd seen anyone out and about with an NG tube, but actually it wasn't in my
your radar, really.
Yeah, so I probably had seen kids and just not even noticed. So I kind of battled when they very first kind of said about her going into heart failure and that she might need some support with her feeding. I felt like I was battling with them against that because I thought that meant that we were going to be stuck in hospital, which obviously wasn't the case. I still did battle because I was still adamant I wanted to breastfeed her for her well-being. I knew that it would help kind of recovery and all of those things. So there were kind of odd battles with dietitians and hospital staff. I was quite glad that my consultant, Ava's consultant, was from South Africa, so he was kind of fully on the breastfeeding bandwagon with me, so that helped massively.
Yeah, well, that's it, isn't it? I think we all find that in our journeys, often how the journey goes depends on the medical professionals you come across and who they are and what their experience is and how they behave has a massive impact on us, doesn't it? So you had a positive.
Well, I had both sides of it. Yeah, positive with him. It was battling the kind of. And I don't want to use the term negative, but it was the nurses. So whenever we were admitted, or that initial kind of being admitted into the hospital while they were trying to sort out her diuretic meds and all of that, when they'd said that they wanted to kind of put her on the NG tube, and it was very much actually all through that 4-month period, the nurses wanted to be able to feed on their schedule.
Just kind of take a lot of the control away from you and control it themselves.
And I think for them it was kind of, they can tick things off on a board and they can clearly understand where they're at.
Because of the weight gain and all that stuff, because children that are born with a complete AVSD, they often want to do the surgery ASAP, but the child has to reach a certain weight for it to make the operation more viable.
Yeah, we were told that we needed to get to a minimum of 4 months and she had to get to a minimum of 4 kilograms.
They can do it sooner. I know that they like to kind of set benchmarks to lower the risks. And the diuretics, just for anybody that doesn't know what they are, they're to take the fluid away that builds up around the heart or the lungs because the heart's not functioning correctly. So diuretics with heart conditions are really common, aren't they? I
think we were on 2 different ones at one point.
And we were a very unusual family because Lucy didn't have any diuretics until she had her op.
Yeah, so, it's interesting.
But that's because one of the holes was quite small.
Yes, so I was going to say, although they both had the same condition, our experiences are very, very different. Different with that.
And I think, I'd prepared myself from meeting yourself and talking to other parents in the community. I had prepared myself that Lucy would need the surgery quite quickly. And actually, just spoiler alert, she didn't have the surgery until she was 16 months old. But, that was quite an unusual case, really. Most children with this heart condition do need
And I think Ava was probably on the opposite end. She was probably not worst case scenario, but so one of her holes was really big. And so she did go into heart failure within weeks, essentially. I think seeing that in black and white on the letter when we got that, saying that was kind of, I remember I was on the phone to my friend and I was just like, I just had a letter through and she's in heart failure. And they were like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
and I
it's
was
bizarre,
like,
isn't it? Because the medical professions don't always use the worst case sort of terminology.
They might
said
it to us.
Worst case. They might talk around it, but they don't always use the terminology until they write the letter.
Yes.
We've had that as well with Lucy with a few things where we've been like, oh, that's actually what's going on.
Yeah, I think
because then when you Google it, it gives you the absolute, 100%, this is what this is, whereas the doctors can sometimes talk around it a little bit to try and alleviate your anxiety.
And that was absolutely the case, that they hadn't used the words heart failure until we got the letter. And that was a shocker, that one.
You've mentioned Andrew quite a few times. I think it's only fair to Andrew, really, that we maybe find out a little bit more about Andrew and about how Andrew felt during this, the Ava's birth and the diagnosis and her heart surgery. Tell us a little bit about Andrew.
So the one thing that does stick out in my head is once we'd had the diagnosis of Down syndrome, and I think he was very much in his head thinking how to manage expectations. So the one thing that really stuck out for me was he'd said, well, she's not going to be able to drive a car. So my instant reaction, I just went straight on and Googled people with Down syndrome, driving license, like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, see, there you go. All these people with Down syndrome who've got driving licenses who can drive. And it was very much well, she might not get married. Look, here. So he was very much...
Heidi and James.
Well, they were married at that point.
They were together but not married at that point, yeah.
So there was a lot of, oh, well, she probably won't do this or she might not do that and she might not. And I was very much trying to kind of counter that of it may happen, it might not happen. And I think I've already said kind of that was the point when I said to him, she's not going to be defined by her diagnosis. And I think that helped him to maybe process actually can't write her future yet because we don't know. And he knew that she had me as a mum.
But it is a hard thing not to define that future. It's you do jump to conclusions and sadly, despite all of the work that everybody is doing around the world constantly, there are still misconceptions and there are still those assumptions that people will make. And I still find myself making them about Lucy, and I have to stop myself and think she might not do it within a specific time period that's typical, but she probably will get there. And I just have to take a step back.
At that point, he was grieving for the child that he thought he was going to have and didn't. And I guess this is me interpreting him in that situation, and he might tell me I'm doing him a disservice. I don't know. I think, as I said, it was the diagnosis around the AVSD that was probably the hardest for me, but equally I think that was the hardest for him to deal with as well. So he would probably say that he doesn't, but he does have a tendency to go to worst case scenarios in situations. So I think he was a lot more concerned in that 4-month period from kind of her birth and the diagnosis to get into where we had the heart surgery. There was a lot of up and downs, obviously battling with the feeding. She just wasn't gaining weight. There was so many issues.
And that's hard for him. If you're wanting to breastfeed and pushing that, then he can't be involved necessarily in what she is feeding.
Well, so
whereas
all of the children we've mixed.
You still did do bottles, so you would express
which was fine, and he could be part of it, and the older two children could be part of that. The issue there came, the hospital gave us the wrong milk. They gave us some high-calorie milk that was only supposed to be for NG tube because it tastes really bitter, and they gave it to us to put in her bottle, and that put her off the bottle, and she then refused point blank to have the bottle anymore. So then the pressure did come back on to me for that. And so I think that was the point before we'd got to the NG tube. So, yeah, I guess from his point of view, I know like there were times when I felt like I was failing her because she wasn't gaining the weight from the breast milk alone. It wasn't anything to do with my milk, though. It was purely the fact that her tiny little body at that point, all of the energy she was taking from the milk was going on her organs.
Yes. Yeah,
working.
Lucy's always been very low weight, even though she wasn't symptomatic, even up to having a surgery at 16 months. She always followed a very low line on the weight scale. And that they told me that was because her heart was working extra
Ava
hard and burning extra calories.
Not far off dropping off the bottom of the Down syndrome growth chart anyway as well.
Yeah,
She was right at the bottom within that. But yeah, so I guess kind of Andrew found it hard to see how frustrated I was getting with myself and not being able to necessarily help with that side of things. I guess there was a bit more of a relief. So when she did eventually get the NG tube, he would quite often take like the night feed. So the way that we worked it, we worked this with the dietitian because I was adamant. It was very much if she's feeding from the tube, she's not going to be hungry enough to then want to breastfeed. So we're in this vicious.
Yeah, there's a very fine line, isn't there? Yeah.
So
which I don't think people realise. And especially when your brain is fuddled from just having a baby. You were, because you'd had two before, you knew that could be a thing and it was in your mind. Whereas I think a lot of new parents with their first child wouldn't necessarily think, hang on a minute, if I'm giving them all this food through the tube,
they're not going to want.
Why are they going to want to get the breast milk?
And it's the same even if you bottle feed. That was the one thing that we found, that even if you bottle feed, then less likely to then want to kind of, it keeps them fuller for longer. So with the NG tube, we did kind of discuss with the dietitian, and they agreed to let us breastfeed through the day, but we had to record it. So we had a role there because, like, whenever I was feeding, he had to writing
the numbers down. And Andrew does like numbers.
He does. Yeah, we both like numbers. So so he was kind of recording when I was feeding and how long she was feeding for, so that we then knew how much to feed her through the night. Well, just before nighttime, slightly into the nighttime, through the NG tube. Because that was the other added thing, that she couldn't cope with bolus feeding. She was projectile vomiting.
What's bolus feeding?
Oh, okay. So yeah. Oh, well, I was going to say, when you have a child with any diagnosis again, you quickly learn. Like,
you do a lot of the terminology, yeah.
So the bolus feed is where you fill the syringe with however much milk is needed, and you slowly push the syringe into the NG tube. And then obviously it goes, so say it's 20 mils, I can't even think of the measurements that we were doing in that now. All of that would go into her stomach. Obviously you'd push it.
But it would still be quite quick compared to feeding herself kind of thing. Yeah, taking breast milk, whatever. So it would come back up.
So she was just projectile vomiting. So we didn't know whether there was a slight dairy intolerance at that point or whether it was just the pure volume of the milk. So she ended up having to have a machine to kind of very slowly.
I've seen the machines, yeah.
So when you've had a machine, the sounds the machine's making stays in your head for a long time afterwards.
It's quite a whirry noise, isn't it? Yeah,
and it's funny, like even now, like if I hear a machine, obviously she's not been on that for the last 6 years. But if I hear one somewhere, I know exactly what that sound is now. And actually, that was a way that the kids could be really involved. So we taught them how to use the feeding machine, so they could set it up with kind of setting the timer in. You had to set the rate that the milk would drip in.
And how old were they at this point? They were.
So Oscar
would have been quite young.
6 years. So he was 6.
Yeah.
And Maya was 9, and they both really liked. Obviously, we supervised them. We didn't leave them to just set the machine in front of her.
Yeah.
But they really enjoyed
that process of being part. Yeah. And like you say, I think there are ways that, like Andrew got involved with that, there are ways that, partners can help that they don't even necessarily realise that they're helping, or, they're just sort of part of the process.
Just actually thought of something with Andrew actually getting to the heart surgery. So on the day that we were taking her in, he was a lot more nervous than me. So I do quite a lot of kind of visualization, affirmations, things like that. So leading up to the surgery, when we were sitting in the hospital, I was kind of visualizing her as a 5-year-old going to school. And that was the thing that was keeping me going in my head, right? I'm going to visualize her as a 5-year-old because she's going to get through this and she's going to be fine. And that's where we're going to get to.
Oh, you made me cry.
Up to just outside kind of where you could go into the theatre, I think I must have been carrying her at that point. And Andrew had said, I don't want to go into
the room where they
with her
over to sleep,
because I don't want that to be the last memory of her if anything goes wrong.
Yeah.
And that hadn't even entertained my mind.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I need to be with my child for as long as I possibly can be with her. It's like my thoughts and feelings weren't even in there with that. It was kind of
it just shows how differently we all think.
Yeah.
And I think John and I were probably the same. I think we were probably on slightly different pages in that process. And I just remember the lady, there's a sort of like a liaison type nurse who was there to kind of keep us calm, keep Lucy calm, and kind of, talk us through the process. And she came into the room with us and sort of put her arm around me while they were putting Lucy to sleep. And then when we came back out, she said, and John and I tell this story a lot, she said, we were both like, I think we both took a breath for the first time in about 3 minutes. And she said, I keep asking them for optics out here, I can tell you need a double gin, love. And she was so right. And John wouldn't have.
Maybe we need to do some fundraising for that.
John wouldn't have liked that at all. And I think she knew that. She said it directly to me, like, I can tell you need a double gin. And I was like, yeah.
So I was quite chill.
Yeah, I was up to a point, and then I kind of lost it. Whereas John was probably more nervous from throughout and quite stressed.
Andrew was probably more stressed, kind of holding on to until he saw her on the other side. I think he was a lot more worried about it, whereas I was very much of a what will be, and there's no point in worrying about it now until we'll worry about it if and when we need to worry about it. The one thing that I guess did stick in my head while she was in for surgery was we'd met with the anesthesiologist, it was a mouthful, the night before, and it was only at that point they'd said to us, because of her size, so she'd only just managed to get to 4 kilograms at 4 months, and she hit a plateau. She wasn't gaining any more weight, so they'd said it was, we need to take her in now, like it was, and there was no way that a surgery was going to be pushed. Like, it had to be done at that point. And it was only the anesthesiologist that the night before said, because of her size, you do know that we might not be able to close her chest up because the heart swells through, like during surgery. And I was like, oh, what happens then? And it was that kind of thought of, there's potentially going to be a window into her chest situation.
And that being the first time you hear of that and think about that the night before, when everything's racing through your mind already, to have that racing through your mind as well, that's quite a lot. Like, I suppose we were lucky in the fact that we had longer and spoke to different families and knew more of what to expect and we always knew that was a possibility. But to hear it the night before.
Yeah, unfortunately we weren't in that situation, but that was the one thing when they called, I was just like, is her chest closed? It's like, yeah, right, that's all right. So the one piece of advice that I took on board while she was in surgery was find something to do to keep you busy. So
I keep saying that to parents, but a lot of parents just can't seem to be able to bring themselves to do it, whereas John and I did keep ourselves.
We'd planned to go and clear the garage out because we knew it needed sorting.
That is a lot in that situation.
Get that far, to be fair.
I can't imagine you would. But
we'd gone
going off and getting some food and stuff and having a walk and
we'd gone and got settled into the house. That obviously the Freeman is quite fortunate that it's got house on site. So we'd gone and got ourselves settled in the room there, and then. I can't remember what else I think it was just a case of getting settled and getting all the stuff sorted there. And I think we'd then gone home and picked the kids up from school because it was, by the time, I think we were slightly delayed going into surgery. So we didn't have like the full day that we thought we were going to have. So we'd then gone and picked the other two up from school. And we were like, right, let's go. We'll go to the pub and grab some dinner as a family. And my mum was up so that she was there for the other two. So we were halfway through our meal when we got the phone call to say she was out of surgery. And it was just like, well, we weren't expecting her out yet. So we shoved the food back in our faces, essentially, and then got in the car. And I think we'd taken 2 cars up to the pub just in case. Yeah. So my mum could kind of just go back with the kids and go straight in the car. And
it's amazing how you kind of have to forward think these things and plan these things, and you don't even realise at the time what you're actually doing. And obviously, I've just got Lucy, the one. You've got 3. We've talked a little bit about Maya and Oscar. Tell me a bit more about their reaction to when Ava was born and her diagnosis, going through the surgery, the pull that the surgery and things will have had on yourself and Andrew, and the effect, they may have felt from that. But then going forwards, how they've adapted.
So in terms of when she was first born, they were just so excited to see their baby sister. And even now, I'd say they don't see the Down syndrome.
No,
so
their bond is incredible.
But when we're out and about, even now, it'll be like, well, how did that person know that Ava had Down syndrome? And I'm just like, it just warms my heart so much that like they
don't see it.
They just see Ava being Ava.
Yeah.
And that was it from kind of day one. Now, obviously, when they came into the hospital to go home, and then we had that kind of bit of a whirlwind of rushing over to the Freeman, and my mum and dad and my sister kind of taking them back to our house. They were obviously concerned at that point. I think it probably has affected them. I think there probably is some, and I will use kind of trauma in inverted commas here, that we possibly need to kind of delve into it as they get older. I'm sure that there are things that kind of have affected them that we've not necessarily known.
Well, like you said, that initial 4 months from Ava being born to having a surgery was such a whirlwind for yourself and Andrew.
And I think that's the period that will have affected them.
Yeah. So much focus on Ava.
I mean, Maya very quickly stepped into a mother role, as you know, and even when we go on our mum's nights and days out, she will come along with us. And there were moments where we had to kind of remind her that she wasn't her mum, and I think that would have been the case regardless of whether Ava had Down syndrome or not. But I think they're both very protective over Ava. Maya is extraordinarily protective over her, as I say, so much to the fact that she does kind of mother her, and we do have to remind her that she's not her mum and she is a sister, and they do have an amazing
and also
bond.
That Ava can do things for herself and Maya doesn't need to do everything.
Oh, well, we don't need to remind Maya that. Ava will remind Maya that, because she will shout at her. Yeah. Like, so Maya is 15 now, Oscar's 12 and Ava's 6. So yeah, Maya was 9 when Ava was born. So she was kind of at that age of, she was very proud, big sister, wanting to look after her.
Yeah, I think that's quite natural that she would want to mother her at that age. I was 8, and when my brother was first born, I was just the same with him until he could toddle and get in my way.
Yeah.
And
as I say, now Maya's teenager, it's a bit more 50-50 of the wanting to kind of mother her and play with her, and then absolutely not wanting her anywhere near her.
Need your own space, and absolutely.
But yeah,
my full brother did go through that with me.
I think I'd say they did cope remarkably well through all of the heart period, shall we call it?
Yeah.
Leading up to the surgery, I've always believed in being kind of open and honest with them. So we explain in terms of Down syndrome that it might just be that she finds things a little bit harder and she might just need a little bit of help to do things. And then with the heart, we'd kind of explained that she had some holes in her heart. And as I say, the consultant kind of drew us some diagrams and things, and we used those to help as well. They probably were worried. Well, I know they were worried actually in their own way, but we had that space that they could air their worries. Maya probably was more able to kind of air that than Oscar, just with his age, being a 6-year-old boy. How do you share that you're a bit worried and a bit concerned? And we didn't go, obviously we signed the paperwork that says there's a 5% chance she might not make the surgery. We didn't share that with the kids.
No.
But we kind of, they were aware that it was a very serious surgery. And we talked about kind of that she would need some time afterwards. We made it very clear that when they were going to come in to see her, there might be tubes and wires and things. Obviously, they get rid of the majority of them before even we see her.
But you stayed in Scott's house on site and they stayed at home.
They stayed at home with my mum,
your mum,
Which incidentally, I'm going to come down to the books now. The whole kind of process, that kind of I guess the way that we explained Down syndrome and all the heart stuff was what led me to write Ava the Mermaid. And Ava the Mermaid goes to hospital. And Ava the Mermaid goes to hospital. It's not even Ava's journey in that one. It's about the siblings and how their emotions were through that period. And it is very much Maya and Oscar in the book with Ava in her mermaid form in the hospital. And that's about kind of, well, it's okay and it's normal for siblings to feel a little bit worried.
Because the baby doesn't really know what's happening. The baby isn't really affected because the baby doesn't understand, whereas if the siblings are older, they do.
Yeah. And I think in a way, for them, the bit that actually got them most was that me and Andrew weren't at home.
Yeah, I was saying about the separation, and you can have, I think they could possibly stay with you at Scott's house, but it's kind of almost like...
They don't like it.
They don't encourage it, do they?
You can only really... You're supposed to have the same two people in the room at any one point. Now,
from a sort of infection bubble point of view.
I don't really know the reason why. I think it's just so that they know who's there for fire regs and things like that as well.
Yeah.
But we had kind of agreed that if we'd gone to the next weekend, which we thought we were going to be, that Maya was going to come and do a night at Scott's house and Oscar was going to come and do a night at Scott's house and go in and see her.
So involved that little bit more because you were getting further along in the process and it's slightly less scary.
Well, it was also to do with school and the fact that when they weren't in school. Yeah. So, but actually we didn't even get that far. She was home within 6 days of having full open heart surgery, which was just... We'd anticipated that she was going to be in for far longer.
Well, you're told your stay is likely to be 10 to 14 days.
Yeah. And then they also said to us, the fact that she has Down syndrome, it's potentially going to be longer because the chances are that she will be on the ventilator for longer. Well, she wasn't.
So Ava's 6 now. So it must feel like quite a long time since the surgery. How's she doing?
Oh, it's a whole other lifetime ago. I never thought I would forget those days, but they are getting a little bit more wishy-washy. So now she is in year 2 of a mainstream school. It's just the most fabulous mainstream school that we've found, that we've kind of been really lucky to have on our doorstep. It's a 2-form entry school, so it's quite a big school as well. And she is just loved and adored by, well, not even just the kids in her year group. Most of the children in the school
local celebrity
know who Ava is. Oh, she's total local celebrity.
Lucy is at nursery. Everybody at nursery knows who Lucy is. Yeah.
So she's just started at Beavers recently, and there's a couple of kids out of her class, but also there's other kids that are within the school, and they know who Ava is.
Yeah.
So she's doing really well. She's modelled for Asda a couple of times. So she's been on the Asda nappies a couple of times as well.
I do always do a double take when I see her on the shelf. It's a bit strange, but it's lovely.
But she's just a little whirlwind. She does everything her way, as I predicted when she was born. She's doing really well.
She does quite a lot outside of school as well, doesn't she? You mentioned Beavers, but she does other things.
She's in an inclusive singing and dancing theatre group as well. She goes swimming. She loves she just loves singing, dancing.
She's done gymnastics as well.
She did do gymnastics as well. She doesn't do that so much anymore. She's very good. She's very flexible, very bendy.
Yeah.
She is good at gymnastics.
That is definitely a plus side of having hypermobile joints, isn't it? That I think she likes the dancing and the singing and things. The fact she can dance really easily.
She's totally tone deaf. She will bell out a tune, but it is not in tune.
But the passion's there, and that's what it's all about.
She makes up for it with enthusiasm.
Yeah.
She keeps us all on our toes. Oh, she's a proper little comedian, actually. She likes to make people laugh. Mm-hmm. So she will, if she gets a laugh out of you, she will repeat it over and over again.
So you mentioned earlier about writing children's books. Tell me a bit more about those. And I think you've got quite a few under your belt now, and they're featured in, I think, Down Syndrome Northeast use them.
Yeah, so I'd already had kind of previous books that I'd written named after Maya and Oscar around kind of self-belief and confidence. And when Ava was born, well, before she was born, I knew I was going to want to write a book about Ava, but I didn't know what her character was going to be. The others are a unicorn and a dragon. So I wanted to kind of keep in the mythical creature thing, but I had no idea. And I thought, just didn't know what I was going to write it about. So actually, having the postnatal diagnosis of Down syndrome, that was kind of my light bulb moment of, I need to write this about inclusion and kindness.
So for you, it was about sort of not necessarily about spreading awareness as such, is it? It's more about inclusion.
So it has little nods to Down syndrome throughout it. So Ava has her heart warrior scar on the illustrations. The fins on Ava and the other little mermaid that has Down syndrome are slightly shorter to kind of just go alongside the slightly shorter limbs and things with people with Down syndrome. And she has 3 colours in her tail rather than 2. So there were little nods to Down syndrome within it. Without it being about Down syndrome per se. So it was more about that kindness and inclusion, because I wanted to try and create, you know me, I'm all about changing the world, Laura. So it was about trying to kind of create that inclusive, kind world, to understand that some people need a little bit of help sometimes. And then obviously, so that's the one that goes in the Down syndrome North East baby boxes. So any of the babies that are born in the North East hospitals get a copy of that as part of their welcome packs. It was used by Positive About Down syndrome as well. I don't think they're using it anymore, but they were doing packs going into nurseries at one point. So they were using that book as part of the packs that they did there as well. And then obviously I wrote Ava the Mermaid Goes to Hospital. That was actually written as part of a charity project through COVID to raise money for children's mental health charities. And it was they wanted stories that were health related. So it made sense. It was still fairly fresh in my mind at that point, with it being kind of 2 years after her surgery. So that was when I wrote Ava the Mermaid Goes to Hospital. And I wanted kind of that side of the siblings' point of view and how they kind of coped with it, and just keeping the theme of the books as well, really, that kind of just looking at the emotions and that well-being perspective.
And that's led you into a new career as well.
It has, yes. I now help other people publish books. So on the back of doing those, people were asking me how to do it. So yeah, I ended up setting up as a book coach and publisher. But all of the books that I do really are about having that kind of change in the world element on them, all about helping people.
I've noticed that, like, you've got a bit of a kind of theme almost, isn't it, with the people that you want?
Because it wasn't intentional.
They're the people that you'll have the greatest connection with when you know, and that's important when you're helping somebody write a book, I think, to have that connection, definitely. I think having a child with Down syndrome, it changes your world, definitely, but I think none of us really realise or anticipate the subtleties of certain things that will change, like our careers, without necessarily directly linking it back to having a child with Down syndrome. But it kind of changes your outlook, doesn't it? And I think it makes you want to do things differently. And I think that often ends up leading to career changes and things as well, because it's been the same for me.
Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt.
Yeah. I want to say a massive thank you, Eleanor. I've really enjoyed having you on the podcast. Have you enjoyed it?
Thank you for having me. No, I feel really privileged that you asked me to be part of it.
Oh, no, I'm really pleased. Thank you. And the next episode, Lucy will arrive. I apologise for the spoilers up to this point, but I can't keep my mouth shut. But yes, we will cover a lot more about the birth of Lucy and what happens next. So please tune in. If you'd like more details about any of the things we've discussed in the podcast today, including Down Syndrome North East and the baby boxes, you'll find those on the podcast website.
Niltoni Broadcast Network, NBN. Popcorn for your ears.